Hi, my name's Adam G. I'm a commissioning editor and producer who has spent most of his career at Channel 4 and then subsequently increasingly in the online video world. The thing that drew me to filmmaking first was really the storytelling side of it. Just all the different ways that you could communicate such a rich kind of mix of stories. So I think that was the thing that really kind of got me. I've never been that interested in the technical stuff, not in pure filmmaking, not in multimedia that I've worked in for many years and sort of in a pioneering period. I was never interested in the technology. It's always the application of the technology that is interesting. And then from a producer's point of view, it was always just have enough knowledge of the technology to know when someone was kind of bullshitting you. But beyond that, that's all you needed to know. I did have an opportunity to get involved in film, both through the course that I was doing because it played a small part in it, but also I set up the Film Society where I went to university, and I got to meet some amazing people from Michael Powell of Powell and Pressburger through to David Putnam, who brought an early cut of one of his movies, The Mission. That's where I learned a really important lesson actually as a producer. When I organised this University Film Society, I had to get in touch with people, and I couldn't believe really how easy it was to get in touch with people, and basically that you could more or less kind of cut out the middlemen most of the time. So it was a really important lesson for me about how to reach out to people and get them involved in your plans. Like it's not as hard as you might think. Independent film has got a really important role to play, but at the same time, it's important not to sort of fetishize it. Other kinds of filmmaking remain really important, and it's really the overall mix and the interactions between the different kinds of filmmaking that matters. So I'm not like independent good, studio or whatever bad. They all have their role to play, but independent is perhaps the most lively, energetic, important kind of energy in the picture. And it's really important that people in that sector get a fair crack of the whip. They have ways of financing their work, and they have ways of getting it noticed, because one of the hardest things is you think that making the film's difficult, actually getting eyeballs to it is equally difficult. So that's something to bear in mind. Making a brilliant film is actually only half the picture. You've got to get it in front of people. I got my first job in the industry from a newsletter from the University Careers Office. In those days, it was all paper and not electronic. I got a break by running the offices of a small cooperative of film technicians. As it turned out, it was pretty interesting because one of those technicians was Roger Deakins, who's just won 2 cinematography Oscars on the trot. One of the other partners is Dick Pope, who did all of Mike Leigh's films and lots of other interesting movies in recent years. And then there were 2 other partners equally interesting, maybe not as well known, but just as interesting, Jack Hazan and David Mingay. And it was a great apprenticeship. I didn't realize until I left 2 years later. I had no idea how much I'd learned. It was almost by osmosis, but actually I'd learned a lot. I knew a lot of people. I didn't realize I had a nascent network there, but I did. And that's how I got started. So I've been a commissioning editor for more years than I care to remember. I spent 13 years at Channel 4. As commissioning editor there, both in multi-platform and in short form. And then I went on to be the first commissioner of original content at Little Dot Studios. And then latterly, I've been commissioning original content of a non-sports variety at Red Bull Media House, so human interest stories. And my take on commissioning really is that it's really it's at its best, it's a really interesting relationship between the commissioner and the filmmaker. And it's one of those sort of situations where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, or put it another way, you know, the two heads are better than one. So at its best, it's a really creative relationship where the film is better than either party would have made it without the other. And it's basically a creative conversation. One of the sort of key sets of questions that you want to be answering is, why are you telling this story now? And why are you the right person or people to make the story? That's really important. There are a number of other sort of areas that I could go into, but I think I would single out those ones, because if you don't have a good answer to those two things, you're kind of on the back foot from the outset. I guess also something that people often say, but a degree of kind of passion, clear kind of passion about what you're doing is really important. You can't go in and be too cool or too lukewarm about what you're talking about, or even be too nervous. You know, you need to go in and show people the energy you have for the story that you're pitching them. Because if you don't champion it, who the hell is going to? So that's really important. You need to go in with really good energy, and also very, you know, well informed. You know, don't walk into somewhere and pitch them something that they made 2 years ago. Do the due diligence, do the research, and just be on a sure footing that what you're pitching them has a good chance of being of interest. I think one that I would pick out actually was after Big Brother disappeared from the Channel 4 schedules, leaving a massive hole. I worked on the first show that came in to fill that hole, which was called 7 Days. It was basically like The Only Way is Essex or Made in Chelsea, but it was set in Notting Hill, because it's an area of real contrasts socially. And so it was a good setting for the kind of stories that we were trying to tell. It was a documentary project made by the makers of Gogglebox, amongst others, and they would turn around an hour-long program in a week, and it was edited during the week so that it was extremely topical. You could tell that it had been made very recently from the references in it. And it was a multi-platform project. So the idea was basically that it featured a number of people that had a number of big life decisions to make. And the idea was that people would be able to help people in their life decisions by using an online facility called ChatNav. And the way that worked was that people could just offer their advice to the protagonists of the documentary, who could either look at it or not look at it, you know, however they wanted to. And it was a really interesting kind of dynamic that developed in this kind of relationship between the people in the documentary and their relations to ordinary people outside that were watching their stories unfold. I would say it was a bit ahead of its time because it predates things like Made in Chelsea. It was slightly at the mercy of the schedulers, who kind of lost their nerve a bit and started moving it around the schedule. But amongst other things, you know, it caused the biggest spike on channel4.com in its history, more than Big Brother ever did, to the degree that it made the whole website fall over, because it was really large numbers you only really get on TV, where people make a stampede for something online at the same moment. And the technology couldn't really kind of cope with it. But it was very bold, it was well executed, it was really interesting to watch, and it just was, well, I remember the chief executive of Channel 4 saying afterwards, David Abraham, he said to me afterwards, he said, you know, when people go and look back at the history of multi-platform, that one's going to be on the landscape, because it's something really kind of pushing the boundaries. So and I kind of feel, you know, when I look back at it, I feel that as well. It, you know, it was a really compelling watch and a really interesting idea. I would tell my younger self really to go with the flow, um, to be open to opportunities, to have your eyes open to opportunities, to seize them in a sort of positive, non-rapacious sort of way, to generally behave with an open and generous mentality towards your co-workers and the people that you're working with, both above and below you. To enjoy the process of that, really. I think that's why I'm really a big advocate of that notion of working in an open and generous way, of helping people when there's no immediate reward, of connecting people, all those things that aren't kind of really necessary. But I think overall, and I've tried to find a better word for it, but I have to come back to the K word, karma. Karma as in K-R-M-A type of karma. It does come back to you, really. You know, if you behave well, if you behave playfully, if you behave creatively, it all kind of comes back to you and makes for a satisfying career.